satisfied that the Federal Assembly will support the membership of these new 4 regions. This reflects the will of millions of people.
И это, конечно, их право, их неотъемлемое право, которое закреплено в первой
Needless to say, this is their fundamental right. Indeed, that right is enshrined in our own national law, and indeed in the UN Charter, which provides the self-determination of the people. And we know that our ancestors in the great Russia defended Russia. This is where our illustrious ancestors defended our territories all the way up to Catherine of Russia. Back in 2014, some people did not accept the fascist coup in the Ukraine. Some people died to defend the right to speak their own language, indeed to defend their faith, their creed, their ways of life. These are the martyrs of Odessa and Katyn. These are the victims of terrorist acts conducted by the Kiev regime. These are volunteers, civilians, women, men and children, Ukrainian as well as Russian nationals. The people's leader, Zakharchenko of Donetsk, Stella Govoren, the public prosecutor of the Republic of Luhansk. Indeed, Gajimokov Medov and many other heroes lost their lives during the special military operations. These are our heroes. They are the heroes of the great Russia. And let us have a minute of silence to pay tribute.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
За выбором миллионов жителей в Донецкой и Луганской народных республиках, в
We are here abiding with the decisions of millions of people living in the regions of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. But behind this is our own long-lasting history. Going back thousands of years, people have kept their love for Russia, for the motherland, and no one can destroy that love in our souls. And that is why, generation after generation, the younger and the older have voted for our common future. Back in 1991, in Belodedje, an agreement was signed, and it was the representatives of the elite of the party at the time that took a decision, thinking not of the motherland, but making unilateral decisions that caused divisions amongst our own people. That led to a national disaster. And indeed, just like after the revolution, republics were created with artificial borders. And indeed, in the 1991 referendum, our own great nation was taken apart, was dismantled, and we were presented with a fait accompli. Well, I believe that the people behind this knew exactly what they were doing. And I'm thinking in particular of the Americans, but this is the past. The Soviet Union no longer exists, and Russia doesn't need it anyway. Such is not our purpose. Nonetheless, nothing is stronger than the will of the people. Here you have people who believe they are part of Russia, because of their language, their history, their civilization. For hundreds of years, they lived in the united territory, and they yearn for their historic motherland. For 8 long years, these people have suffered the bombing, the shooting, and no one, and they were subject to calls for hate against anything Russia, anything Russian. People have been tortured, manhandled. But this is a message for Kiev and people in the West, people living in the territories of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhia. They are our citizens forever. We call on the Kiev regime to cease fire immediately, to put an end to the war it started back in 2014. We call upon the regime to go back to the negotiating table. We're ready for talks. We've said so before. But the people of these 4 territories have made their choice, have made their decision, and there's no turning back. Russia will not let them down.
И сегодняшние киевские власти должны относиться к этому свободному волеизъявлению людей с уважением, и никак иначе.
The authorities in Kiev today must accept the free choice of these people. There's no other way. This is the only way to peace, and we shall defend our territory with all means available to us. We will ensure the security of our people. Such is our liberation mission. We shall rebuild the towns and villages, the schools, the museums. We shall develop industry, infrastructure. Indeed, we will restore the welfare system, health, education, pensions. We will restore safety and security, and people will see and feel the difference. They will feel the support of the Russian people of all towns and cities of Russia. Dear friends and colleagues, I should also like to turn to the soldiers and officers that have been involved in the special military operations. After the decree for partial mobilization, others have joined the ranks of the military, and I would like to call on all these soldiers and talk and speak to their wives and children, tell them why we're fighting the enemy that has been pushing the world into this crisis. Who stands to gain from this? Our brothers and sisters in the Ukraine that are part of our own people have seen with their own eyes what the leaders of the Western world have in store for them. The masks are down. The collective West naively believed that the world would take its tact in its stride. They thought that Russia would never rise again. It almost happened. We do remember the challenging years in the 1990s, but Russia was able to resist, bounce back, and regain its position in the world. And yet, the West is looking for opportunities to challenge Russia, to break it apart. Such has always been its intention. Wreak havoc amongst the people of our country. They simply cannot accept the existence of Russia with its huge territory, its huge resources. with this people that will never agree to live under the dominion of others. And yet, the West has been striving to bring about a new colonial system to keep plundering other people, other countries. It wants to hold the whole world to ransom. This form of hegemony the West wants to install and keep, such is its real intention, and that is why. That is why the West has been trying to challenge the democratic process, has been trying to support separatist movements, because the West simply will not accept such integration. They want the people to get away from sovereignty. They want the people to just walk into the hands of the United States. Indeed, some people in the West are happy to become the vassals of the United States. Others have been corrupted into this, and if they can't succeed, they will destroy other countries, create humanitarian disasters. They will destroy millions of human lives. Indeed, they will sow terrorism through protectorates, colonies, semi-colonies. They will stop at nothing to reach their objectives. And that is because it is because of that intention that the West has been waging war on Russia. They would like Russia to be a Western colony. But we're not talking here about cooperation on equal footing. They want to plunder us. They want us to be their slaves. We don't see eye to eye with them, and that's why they've been challenging our own philosophers, because our own culture, our own civilization represents a challenge to them. Our own well-being is a challenge to them. They don't need Russia, but we do need Russia. Let me remind you here that it's the West's aspiration to become the hegemon of the world has met with resistance from our own people, and yet the West still hopes to have its way. Indeed, in the past, there were examples of this. And yet, there were international treaties that are trampled upon, and so NATO is spreading the promises made to Soviet leaders went down by the wayside. International agreements are constantly flouted. We're told that the West is there to protect the international order based on rules, but who defined the rules? Who accepted those rules? This is absurd. For many years, we've seen these double standards, taking the world for fools. But Russia is a great country. It will never go down that way. It will never accept these rules.
Именно так называемый Запад растоптал принцип нерушимости границ. А сейчас по своему собственному усмотрению решает,
It is in fact the West that has been violating the principle of non-interference at the borders. And yet they think that they can get away with it, but not others. Why do they think they can make decisions and not others? These are self-appointed rights. That is why the West cannot accept the will of the people of Crimea, who also made their choice. The Western elites
тоталитаризма,
simply
деспотизма.
refused to accept the will of
Они
people.
нагло делят мир на своих вассалов, на так называемые цивилизованные страны, и на всех остальных, кто по замыслу сегодняшних западных
This
расистов должен
despotic
пополнить
attitude
список варваров
proposes
и
to
дикарей.
divide the world between what they call the civilized world and the barbarian world. They are sticking labels on parts of the world where you have entire people, states, finding themselves tarred with that brush. That's nothing new. The West has always behaved in such a way. The West's attitude consists in dividing the people into two kinds, the first class and the second class citizens, but we shall never accept that form of racism, not to mention Russophobia that is spreading around the world. It's a form of racism. Same attitude vis-à-vis our culture. If you're not with us, they say you're against us. Historic crimes were committed, and yet the West is constantly looking for other culprits. They want other people, other countries to beg for forgiveness. Look at colonial history. The West should be reminded that it is back in the Middle Ages that the West started this tradition of colonization. There was the slave trade, there was the plundering of India, Africa, there were the wars of France and England against China, Asia, and China had no choice but to open up its gates to facilitate the opium trade, and so entire people had no choice but consuming that drug. Entire people were wiped out. There were witch hunts against entire people conducted by the West. But we stand proud of the fact that here, in the 20th century, our great country, Russia, spearheaded the anti-colonial movement. We fought against inequality around the world. We fought against poverty around the world. And yet, there you have Western elites completely Russophobic, angry against us because we dared resist. And we succeeded in creating a world of fair trade thanks to the strong state that we built. Our state was based on fundamental values, Christian values, but also Islamic and Buddhist values, indeed many others. We know there were many plans to intervene in Russia in the 1917 revolution, and afterwards Russia was able to defend itself, and yet the West was able to reach out to Russian resources at the end of the 20th century. We were called partners, but we were treated as colonies. Billions of dollars worth of wealth was plundered from our country.
We have forgotten nothing, and the residents of Lugansk, Donetsk, the regions of Kherson and Zaporizhzhia have voted for the reunification of our territory. Thank you. Western countries speak constantly about the fact that they bring freedom and democracy, but it's totally false, erroneous. It's the opposite. It's exploitation instead of freedom. It's slavery. And all this world order is anti-democratic and anti-liberal. It's total hypocrisy. The United States is the only country who used nuclear weapons twice in history by annihilating Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The US, with the British, reduced to ruin without any military need. The cities of Hamburg and Dresden without military need. It was just for demonstrative purposes. And the same goes for the nuclear bombing. It was about intimidating the whole world. The United States have left a very bad memory in Korea and Japan, the use of napalm, chemical weapons. Germany, the Republic of Korea, Japan are viewed as allies on an equal footing. What type of equality does that represent? In fact, these are leaders who are under orders, who are subject to eavesdropping, not just in their offices, but in their homes, and the whole world swallows that up without raising an eyebrow. And the vassals, well, it will be the Europeans, will be the subject of Euro-Atlantic solidarity. This destructive policy, this will have pushed millions of people into migration. Thousands of people heading for Europe will perish. And this wheat that comes from Ukraine, that will leave Ukraine in order to keep alive famished populations. In fact, this wheat is heading for Europe to the detriment of countries that need it. And that is sheer deception. And the Americans are using tragedies in other countries in order to weaken their rivals. It affects France, Spain, Italy. Washington requires ever renewed sanctions against Russia. The majority of European leaders obey. They understand that when the United States imposes on the EU that it should abandon Russia's energy resources, well, if that compels Europe to destroy its own industry, the Europeans understand that, but would rather serve others' interests. Not just the fact of being lackeys, but they're also betraying their people, but that's a matter for them. And the Anglo-Saxons are not happy with the mere sanctions. They're embarking on acts of sabotage. They attacked, they targeted international infrastructure that crossed the Baltic seabed. It's an international infrastructure. We know who benefits from the crime. The U.S. dictate is the dictate of violence, of force. And this can be couched in more attractive terms, but it is a right that is based on violence, which leads them to deploy hundreds of military bases throughout the world and to forge an ever-growing number of military alliances, such as AUKUS and others. It's also the military axis between Washington, Seoul, and Tokyo. Those who are against Western hegemony are viewed as enemies, and it's on that principle that the U.S. military doctrine is based, as well as that of NATO. The neocolonial plans of the West are presented in a totally hypocritical manner, with a claim for friendship and peace. But in fact, it's the same features that we find in the successive strategies. It's all about putting an end to and to scupper any form of attempt to sovereignty. It affects Syria, Iran, African states, as well as partners and allies of the United States. As soon as they don't like something, well, the Americans will order sanctions against a bank, a company. This is a practice which will spread. They're targeting everyone, including our immediate neighbors, the countries of the CIS. They view, it's all wishful thinking on their part, and this principle of sanctions against Russia, well, they thought that they were going to be able to control the whole world. But in fact, these sanctions are simply prompting reactions, except on the part of masochists. The majority of countries refuse to accept that situation. They want to maintain rational cooperation with Russia, and that's a reaction that the West wasn't expecting. They're used to thinking in a very stereotypical way. But in fact, their thought process has become ossified over time, and they maintain their situation of exception. And there's a genuine famine of information. The truth was buried under a mountain of lies and propaganda. The bigger the lie, the easier it is to spread. But we can't feed people with millions of dollars that have been simply printed. We can't just heat people's homes with money that has no value. In fact, you can't feed people with paper. You need to feed them with proper food. And these inflated capital values will serve no useful purpose. We need energy products, so the Europeans have led to convince their citizens not to turn up the heating, and all those who are against termed extremists or enemy, and Russia is portrayed as the source of all ills. In fact, Western elites, as we understand it, don't have the intention of seeking a solution to the food crisis that started because of them and well before our special military operation in Ukraine. It's not my intention to resolve all the problems of inequality or injustice. I'm sure they're ready to use all the recipes that they have at their disposal, and the West at the beginning of the 20th century experienced World War I. World War II allowed the United States to overcome the Great Depression that allowed them to become the country that, with the dollar, has the world's reserve currency. The situation deteriorated, but nevertheless the West was able to retrieve the situation thanks to the collapse of the Soviet Union. And so European countries sought to destroy the Soviet Union, and all countries seeking autonomous action came up against the reactions. Well, we can expect the global system to collapse, and a war, of course, allows us to draw a line under the balance sheet, and it's obvious that today's neo-colonialist model is doomed. The masters of this model will, right up until the end, seek to cling to it and to remain the masters of this market looting, which will deprive billions of individuals, most of humankind, of the right to determine their own future. And it's the very negation of the essential fundamental of moral and family rights. I'd like to return to what I said earlier and address all citizens, not just colleagues in the room, to all Russian citizens. Do we want in our country, in Russia, instead of a mother and a father, that we should have parent number one, parent number two? They've gone mad. Do we want that in our schools, in the early primary schools, that we should teach this perversion, that we should talk about not just men and women, but that there would be an additional gender? Is that what we want for our children, for our country? We will not accept that. We have our own future that lies ahead of us. And this is an attack directed not just against us, but all societies, but all Western societies, this very negation of humankind, this denial of freedom. And when Christ, during the Sermon on the Mount, that we will recognize the men through the fruit that they bear. And this is what we see not just in the world, but in the West. The world is entering a period of revolutionary transformation. There are new development centers that represent the majority of the global community. They are defending a multipolar world where they'll be able to defend their independence and their true, genuine freedom, their right to self-development that is creative throughout the world, including in the United States and Europe. There are many people who share our mindset, and we sense very much the support of these people, and we also sense that there's an anti-colonialist movement that is developing throughout the world against this unipolar hegemony, and it's that force that will determine the future of global geopolitics. Today, we're fighting for justice and freedom, for ourselves, for Russia, to renounce despotism and dictates that are elements of the past, and the idea of a superiority by birth of a certain class of humankind. We must turn that page of history. It's an irreversible process. The world will not go back to the previous page. The period during which we had to conduct this battle, this struggle for our country and for our people, is the battle for Russia that we are waging. The great Russia, a great historic Russia for our children and for our grandchildren. We must defend them against these outrageous experiments that seek to undermine what they think, to ensure that they want to eradicate our history and our culture. And we must therefore close ranks, come together and rely on the solidarity, creativity, and justice. Let me end by quoting Ivan Lenin, who's a true patriot, Ilyin, who's a true... If it's my country is Russia, it's in Russia that I love, in Russian that I sing and speak. I believe in the spiritual strength of the country. Its destiny is my destiny. Its strength is mine. Its misfortunes are my misfortunes, and its fulfillment is my joy. These are principles which, after 1,000 years, bring us to a choice, and a choice was made by the peoples of the People's Republics of Lugansk and Donetsk and the inhabitants